Well, welcome everybody. We're going to be talking about effective onboarding today. So looking at some things that I've seen work well in the past, work well for teams, as well as some things that didn't work so well for some teams to possibly avoid. Just a brief mention of what we've got coming up here is we have 2.5 books coming up. Pratik and Dan are going to be talking to us about their books and contents in their book, talking about scaling and also about getting metrics for predictability. This is on I think it's the 21st. So really look forward to that. Encourage you to come and invite people that might be interested in those topics. And then the next week, we've got Chris Stone is going to be talking to us, doing a retrospective masterclass, Level Up Your Continuous Improvement Game. Chris does some very, very innovative retrospectives, and I'm looking forward to seeing this talk, seeing how he runs things, and maybe getting some ideas myself. So this is going to be exciting. So we've got these two things happening the last 2 weeks of the month. Next week is still to be determined what we'll be talking about, so keep an eye out for an invite for that. So we're talking about onboarding, and right here, I wanted to, this is kind of interesting. I was like, okay, what does onboarding mean? Where does that come from? And as you might imagine, it comes from the idea of ships. And so the original meaning was to close alongside another ship or the shore. So to come alongside of another ship. Now, why you were coming alongside it might be to help, trade or help the people on the other ship, or it could be to board them as pirates or something like that. So we're probably talking about the more positive aspect of onboarding, to help the other ship along. Nowadays, the definition that we're probably most used to is to go through procedures to effectively integrate a new employee into an organization or familiarize a new customer or client with one's products and services. So that's the definition we're going to be talking about. So, want to just ask a question. The last time you joined a new team, how did the onboarding process go? How would you rate the onboarding process the last time you joined a team? And I think it's kind of interesting because with COVID and a bunch of people working from home, I think a lot of places had to become much more intentional about how they did onboarding. In the past, I don't know that there was as much thought into making things as streamlined, but I know a lot of places were dealing with how do we make sure that people have computers and it's set up and that they can hit the ground running from home. Whereas in the past, you could kind of work things through by being in the office. So that's probably made some improvements. In a lot of ways, but in some ways it may have pushed us back some. So it looks like we've kind of got a wide variety here. No onboarding at all. So yes, we've got a slide in just a second to hear your story on that if you would like to share. Looks like about 2/3 of us are saying it wasn't too bad. Some people said it was not very good. About 10, 12, 11% were saying it's very, very smooth, and then 7% is a complete dumpster fire. So we've got a range of experience here. I'm glad to see most of us, it was a pretty positive thing. So here's a thing. If you've got a horror story, we would love to hear them because horror stories are always interesting, right? So do you have a brief onboarding horror story? So after 15 years in sales, a good friend convinced me to transfer to the IT world, the work as QA. She was supposed to onboard me, but ended up abandoning me in 1.5 weeks to fend for myself. She's not a good friend anymore. Okay. Too many bad onboarding horror stories to list because of work contract job. Somebody said they don't have an onboarding horror story, so that's great. Person who hired me immediately left the company after threatening to physically harm his manager. Showed up and they didn't have a computer and took 2 weeks to get through the procurement process. So we've probably got a wide variety of different things here. Do you have more that I can get to for this? No, I think that's it. Okay. Hang on, let me go to the web page and just see if there were any other ones that didn't show up on the page. So I want to see all those. Okay, we've got one here said, when I started working with Scrum and as a product owner, no training at all, the company gave me a speech of 30 minutes to explain Agile, Scrum, and Jira, and that was it. Review, no laptop. Okay, handed a chart. Wait for this last one to come in. So there, wide variety of things. Fake promises about mentoring that never happened. So there's probably a lot of room for improvement in most organizations. And here's a couple of stories I found on Reddit. Said, I even had to figure out how to get my own key card because no one would show me. I almost got kicked out of the building as well for trying to get to the place where I needed to pick up my key card because I didn't have a key card. So he got kicked out for not having a key card, but the place you had to go to get the key card was where he was trying to go. So that sounds like a interesting place to work. Let's see. Okay, another one from their mentor gave me 2 projects to evaluate me. He said he would take a look and he would call tomorrow. He never called, so I messaged him. He said he didn't have the time to look at them, and that was a month ago. He also went on vacation for a few days, and the project manager I was supposed to work with also went on vacation. I'm supposed to do these projects, then be put on real work. However, none of that has happened. It's like the company forgot I exist. So those are bad experiences. Rick saying the person who hired me quit the Friday before I started. No one knew who I was or what to do with me why they hired me. There was a story I saw somewhere that somebody had taken a job at a university, moved across country, worked for 7 days, and then discovered that the HR department had no record of her actually being hired. It was a huge mess. So lots of things to try to avoid. Well, here's kind of our outline of what we're going to be talking about. We want to talk about team culture, kind of how to make sure we convey the big picture, a vision for their work, computer setup, getting them started, and then kind of dealing with some of the details. So that's kind of the outline of what we're going to talk about. So let's talk about team culture. One of the big things you want to make sure you convey, however you do it as part of onboarding, is make sure that the new person coming in understands what makes your team unique. How it's similar to other teams, but what's actually different about the team and the culture and the way they're working and all those things. And I think that's a very important thing. If you think about how you're onboarding and make sure that they can answer the question about what makes this team unique, you're going to be setting them up for success, a lot more success than some of the places that if they don't have that information. Let's see. So one of the places I worked with, one of the things that was making this team unique, so this was years ago, over 10 years ago now, and they were using DevOps before it was being used in a lot of places, particularly in this organization. And the tool they were using for that was called Chef. So one of the big things we were really, really working on is making sure that when we were delivering software, it wasn't just software, but it was everything needed to deploy that little bit of code and make sure it worked, tested and everything. And the tool we were using was called Chef. So I bought a bunch of paper chef hats, and whenever someone wrote their first chef recipe, which is what you call the code that actually does deployment and does configuration and stuff, I'd send them a chef hat. So after a while, almost everybody on the team had these chef hats, and it was a way to kind of call out what was unique about our team. It wasn't a big part of onboarding, but when you join a team and you see that a bunch of people have chef hats and you hear the word chef, it's a way to kind of differentiate the team. Here's something different. Here's something special about our team. Another thing I've done on a team, the t-shirts that we give away from time to time say, turn your video on. We value face-to-face communication. This was a team working remote. Somebody's asking, oh no, okay, so somebody's remembering what it was like. Those were shirts that we got printed because this particular team was really focusing on creating virtual team rooms and really leaning into face-to-face communication. And so we got sweatshirts for everyone. My kids helped me print them, and it said, turn your video on. You've seen the shirts that we use. And that was a way to really help the team understand the culture. So when somebody new came in, we'd get their shirt sized, and within a few days of joining the team, or sometimes before they joined the team, they'd get the sweatshirt in the mail. And it just helped. Here's the culture. Here's what's unique about our team. Here's what we're doing that's maybe different than where you've been somewhere else. Another very important part of team culture is having meetups. Getting people together, particularly when we're in a world where lots of people may be working either remote or at other locations. A team I was working with, they had formed and worked mostly through COVID. And they finally got together, and everybody was standing in the elevator looking around. And I remember somebody commented, they're like, everybody's a different height than I thought, because they were used to seeing everybody in front of just in front of their desk, and they're like, one girl was really, really short, and this other person was a lot taller than anyone expected, and it was kind of it was an interesting moment in realizing how much, and these people have been working together for a year or more, how much they still had to just learn about each other as a team, just how tall someone is. It's not something that they experienced yet. Another team I was on that was doing a lot of remote stuff, they would get together once a month with the idea that was, they wanted to make sure they had that shared culture. So when somebody new came in, it wasn't like 6-9 months before they finally had a meeting. No, every month they would get together, and it was a chance for people to really get to know each other. They'd usually go out to eat. I wasn't part of it. One time there was something involved, a mechanical bull a bunch of people went to after I'd gone to bed. That was a very big bonding experience from what I understand. Another thing is part of the onboarding process that I've seen done, and this was done a lot when you were bringing lots of people on, but actually giving people a chance to kind of say what's interesting about them, and then doing some type of fun game to see how well people remember it. And so this is from a, here's an example. This was, what movie goes along with what we learned about Richard? And so we had a bunch of movies listed there. It turned out he was a twin, and so The Parent Trap was the one that went along with that. So it was just a fun way, though, to make sure that we were building some personal connections in ways that were harder to do. This was during COVID, but harder to do when this team was forming, people were joining and stuff that wasn't part of when they weren't all together. Another one from that was CJ is associated with which plant? You know, and 21%, I thought it was great, thought that it was the Venus flytrap. It actually was sunflowers, because he was really liked sunflower seeds and claimed to be one of the fastest people at actually shelling them in his mouth. Okay, so conveying the big picture. So a very important thing we want to convey when we're onboarding someone is making sure they understand why this particular project matters. What's important about this project? Who does this project help? What is won if we succeed, and what is lost if we fail? Let me check the chat right here. Yes. Okay, cool. Yeah. Sean, yes, I remember meeting you at that conference. Okay, so why does this project matter? If you're doing something important, make sure that the new member to your team understands why it's important. And this is something that's easy to leave out. They're coming, they've got the job, they're excited about the job, they've got to do X, Y, and Z and stuff. But if you're not really casting that vision of here's why this is important and here's why this matters, you're going to you don't want that to be something that they just have to discover on their own, right? You don't want that to be something that just accidentally they discover they're working on something that's really important. No, convey why it's important. And give opportunities for current members. Why do current members think the project is important? And are you creating a space where people can actually talk through why this project is important to them? Now, oftentimes that can be really, really beneficial. I know we've worked on some projects, and one of the people that were working on it had been on the side where it was really benefiting some, like the people that it was going to help had been on, they had been in that position before. I'm trying to say this without a lot of detail, so sorry for stumbling over that. And they were able to really articulate why this was important to them. So that's a very key thing to make sure you're trying to convey. On the other hand, talking about some places where it hadn't gone so well, I was on one project, and one guy just couldn't stop talking to the new people about how this new technology they were using, he was so excited because once he finished this project, he'd be able to go somewhere and make 10 times as much money because he'd know this technology, and they were really in high demand and stuff. Unfortunately, that led to a situation where everybody was trying to get experience with this one technology, whether or not it fit for the particular problem or not, and ended up with a lot of complexity. But as far as the people conveying, well, here's why this is important to me, here's why the success of this project, you want to create space for that to happen. Who does this project help? Make sure that the new member gets to talk with someone who is excited about using the new system. And now, if we're really following Agile here, and we've got the customers and the developers are interacting, this should be pretty easy, right? This should just come out of that they're going to be talking to each other. But oftentimes organizations create barriers, so the person doing the development work never really knows who the people are that are going to actually use it. And if you're in that situation, obviously try to work to fix that, but especially during onboarding, try to get them some face time with people who are actually excited about using the system. So they know who they are, they know why it's important, and hopefully they know somebody they know people they can reach out to as they're working if they've got some questions about what's important, or how to do a particular thing, like how it should be best represented from the user's point of view. So putting a face on the users of the system that might not be available to talk to your team. One project I was working with was doing stuff for the government, and this system was going to be involved in getting money into the hands of people that were in really bad situations and really, really needed it. And I remember the customer going through and describing the types of situations these people were in and how important this was to them. And it did a great job of really putting a face on, here's why we're doing this, here's why this is important, here's why it really, really matters. Because there's somebody in this situation, here's what their life is like, and this is how important this is to them. So even, I mean, obviously it's big with government stuff, sending people money, but somewhere, somebody hopefully is benefiting from the software that you're writing. And you may not have direct access to them all the time, Hopefully you've got access to somebody that benefits from the system, but really putting a face on those people can be very, very empowering to somebody joining your team. So asking in the big picture, asking what is one if we succeed? So you think about on your newest members, when you're thinking about your the newest members to your team, can they really identify what's at stake? Do they really have the ability? If you talk to somebody that had been there for a week, would they really know what's really at stake and why you're doing what you're doing and why it matters? If not, that's something you really want to be part of your onboarding. And it may be something formal, but maybe it's just a matter of we need to make sure that these people, they get some time with these people to talk to each other to understand what's important. Tell your people how the world would be different when you succeed. If you think in terms of user stories, it's fiction that will become reality when that user story is implemented. But make sure they understand that for the whole software, the whole project. How is the world going to be different? How is the world going to be a better place? And kind of on the other side of things, what is lost if we fail? Can your newest member identify the consequences of failure? If this project doesn't succeed, how will the world be a worse place if we fail? Now, the idea here isn't to try to just terrify them and keep them up at night about how bad the world's going to be, but it is very much worth trying to create. We talked a few weeks ago about creating a healthy sense of urgency. I use the example of my dog. So I'm by the house, the dog's close to the road, and there's a car coming. I want a healthy sense of urgency that brings the dog back to me, and it's a very positive thing. If I create an unhealthy sense of urgency, I can get her to do something that's absolutely not what I want. But we want to understand, for humans, we want to understand the consequences of failure so it can motivate us to really deliver our best for something. Not in a negative way of panic, oh no, the world's going to fall apart, but in a very positive way of this really, really matters. Creating a vision for work. You want new people to understand, how are we going to work? What are we going to do different? How do we make this a success? And how are we going to adapt? So how are we going to work? Making sure that part of your onboarding is really clear on here's how the team is going to try to communicate. Like I mentioned with that one team where we were trying to prioritize face-to-face communication, we made that very, very clear, not just in stating it, but actually in the process of onboarding, that we're trying to get people together and make sure we're able to look each other in the eyes and work through things collaboratively. There's some teams where that's not expected. Which I think is a bad thing, but at least let them know so they don't go in and have no idea what the appropriate way is to communicate. It was interesting in looking through Reddit, some of the questions people had about onboarding. There were several people asking, I was supposed to do this, I'm remote, my boss hasn't gotten back, my manager isn't getting back to me. How often should I bug them if they're not getting back to me? Should I ask them every day, every few hours? Should I wait a week and not do anything and then reach out to them? And it was kind of sad how much the person just didn't know how to communicate with the organization because that hadn't been established as part of the way of bringing them on. And they weren't sure what they needed to do. They weren't sure what the appropriate thing. So make sure that you think through, how do we make sure this person is prepared to be comfortable knowing how to communicate with the rest of the team? And we'll talk more about pairing and mobbing can make that much, much less of an issue. But you need to make sure, even if you're not in an environment that can do a lot of pairing and a lot of mobbing or working in team rooms and stuff, you want to make sure that you at least set them up for the best success they can have in their particular situation. What are the expectations to be aware of? I know there's some places, like some of the teams I've been on, they were really focusing on collaboration. We had an expectation that you wouldn't just create a meeting for something. If you need to go talk to someone, you'd go find them in one of the virtual team rooms and just ask them the question. It wasn't like, oh, they're free 2 weeks from now, we're going to have a meeting, so I'll send a request to them. Because what had happened is particularly when COVID hit, people's calendars were just completely full of meetings for weeks. And by kind of establishing the expectation of we want to recreate the environment of walking down the hall and just asking somebody a question, we were able to lower the strain on having just everything booked all the time. But if you didn't know that, or if you're in a place that had the opposite expectations, you wouldn't know what to do. And how does the team collaborate? So expectations just around, do we usually call people on the phone? Do we send email? Do we use chat? What types of things do we use for chat? What types of things do we use for email? Those are things that you can't just assume because lots of teams have different ways of approaching it. So making sure that you've got some way of making sure that information is either conveyed as part of bringing them on board, or you're putting them in situations where they can actually experience how the teams work. And by experience it, I don't mean just like they're off on the corner by themselves getting pinged by emails from people, but actually experience it functioning well with people. What do we do different? Is the team taking a different approach than other teams? Like, for example, if you've got a team that's really driving everything with behavior-driven development and test-driven development, don't assume somebody coming in is going to just make all the right, just happen to know exactly how you're doing it. That's something that may be very different than they've experienced other places. And if you want to set them up for success, you want to make sure that not only do they know what you're planning to do, but they've actually experienced it and know what it means. When we did that demo here a while back and showed the where my son and I were doing the test-driven development and pair programming, one of the big comments I got back from people where they were saying, yeah, that doesn't look anything like what I've actually experienced when people say they're doing pair programming and test-driven development. And that shows you what a wide variety there is just by saying, when people say, yeah, we're using TDD and we're using pair programming. So you want to make sure you're setting up for them to experience it. And the best way for them to experience is actually getting in a mob or getting in a pair of people and actually working through it together. What do we do different? What does the team value? What does the team value different things than other? What things does the team value that are different than other teams? Even within the same organization, you may have teams that are valuing things very, very differently, and you want to make sure that information is actually conveyed to them or they have a way of experiencing it. Does the team use any different definitions than other teams? So this is a really big one. It is amazing how different the definition of what it means to say this story is done is from team to team. On a lot of teams, it just means the developers are through with it. On some teams, it means it's gone through QA. I encourage teams to try to say, no, it's done when people are actually using it, or it's in your highest environment possible, something much more of it's actually been deployed and everything. But if people joining your team do not understand those definitions that may be different from where they were previously, you're not setting them up for success, because they're going to hear a word and the forms in their mind is going to be completely different than what the rest of the team is thinking. Now, we can give them a piece of paper that's got all the definitions on it, and that may be useful, but what we really want to do is let them experience how the team actually does it. But you want to make sure you're not leaving that up to chance. So how do we succeed? And this is kind of an interesting area, because if you think about what does the team define as success? I've been on some teams, and the definition of success is we make our sprint goal. Like when we commit to something, it always gets done. And that's a huge, huge deal. I've also been on teams that are just, this sprint goal is our best guess of what we're going to attempt, but we're just fine if not everything gets done, as long as something is getting done. And that's a very, very different definition. If you're coming from one world to where everything has to get done or it's a complete failure, you're more likely to be in the mode of trying to pull more things into the sprint to start than if you're on a place that's more of, no, we're focused more on the flow. What can we actually deliver? Even if we don't get to everything, let's make sure we deliver as much as we can. So on the definition of daily success, so what would we consider to be a good day? So maybe it's the team collaborated and making progress to whatever our goal is, or toward delivering a particular story. Iteration success might be we delivered several complete things to the customer, no matter how small, but we delivered them all the way through. And the project success, maybe the customer's using the system and the system can evolve. It might not be that we completed every ticket that was in it and that was originally planned. And this is why, so an example of why that's so important is if you're coming from a place where the mentality is the customers ask for these 100 stories to be done, and if they're not all done by whatever date we have, then the whole project is a failure. If that's how you're defining success, your team is going to behave very, very differently in the way that they do their work than if you define our goal is to deliver as many of the next most important items and adjust based on the customer feedback to give them the most value we possibly can by this particular date and the most value we possibly can in every increment of time. It's a very, very different approach. And so this gets into an entire other discussion, but the point being that if you've got a team that's really focused on nothing can get left out, you're going to see very, very different behavior than if you're on a team where the definition of success is we've left out all the things that turn out not to be the most important thing as you do your work. Those types of things the team will eventually, when you bring somebody new on, they'll eventually probably figure out what you mean, but that's not a good thing to have them just discovering on their own. You want to be intentional about it and making sure that they're experiencing it, but also defining up front. Here's how the team is actually defining success. And how do we adapt? So our plans may change. How are we measuring whether something is working or not? I've been on teams, and from working with a lot of teams, I've been on teams where they feel very, very much that something is working because they're following the plan. We had all these things planned out, and even if we don't actually deliver anything to the customer, if I built out the database and then I built out the UI, and that's just fine. And that's how they're measuring things. That's not a very agile definition, but it is the way the team was working. But imagine you take somebody from that and join a team that's very, very focused on how do I get something into the customer's hands? Because that's how we're measuring whether something's working. We get it through and into the customer's hand. They're not going to be set up for success unless you're able to change the idea of here's how this team is working. Another very important thing is what's the process of raising concerns? Because if you have somebody new on a team, they may not be comfortable just speaking up all the time and saying, hey, I think this is a really big risk here. Or what we're working on here, I'm afraid isn't going to work. So making sure that they know some way, whatever the appropriate way is, it may be raising it in a retrospective. Hopefully they've got people they know they can have conversations with, but making sure that's something that you're not leaving to chance once again, that hopefully they'll figure out who to talk to. So question, how long does it take to set up a computer for a new person on your current project? So where you're working right now, how long does it take? Weeks, a few days, 1 day, half a day, a few hours, and or less than an hour. And this is starting measuring from the point that they actually get the computer. So when your team gets the computer. So Audrey's saying 1 day in the chat. And Audrey, there should be a thing where you can actually real-time poll. You can put in the chat too. That's great. You guys aren't seeing it? Are some people not seeing it? Tell you what, let me throw a link in here in case it's not showing up. You can open it in that if it's not opening in WebEx. If you're on a phone, it may not work quite as well. It should work, but yes, what Sarah's saying, there should be a Slido button at the bottom. Either way works fine. Okay, so a few days. Okay, so that's not so bad. Weeks, 1 day. 5% are saying a few hours. 4% are saying half a day. And I can't see to the bottom to see if anyone's doing less than an hour here. Jump over here, we'll see. Okay, we got 3% that are less than an hour. So that's pretty cool. I was working for one place, and this was, they brought in a new developer, which is great. We're going to get him up to speed and stuff, but then discovered it was going to take a few weeks to get him his computer. So things hadn't been planned out, and he wasn't going to have a computer. And for various reasons, this team was using a computer that was very different than anyone else was using and some things like that. So to get him up to speed, I was looking, I was like, okay, my wife's computer is getting old. I probably need to get her another one sometime. So I went ahead and bought a computer and shipped it to him overnight. So he had a computer to work for the week or whatever in order before things came. I see somebody saying that the computer works the same day, a few hours, but getting them all the correct licenses, access software, days to week. So this is this can be a very big time sink for trying to deal with setting up computers. So some of the things I've seen, or we're going to talk about some of the things that have worked well, is a wiki page, automated setup, containers, and then talking about pairing and mobbing. So with that in mind, one other question for you here. Does your team have an onboarding wiki? Like, do you have a wiki that says, here's how to get started with the computer and people you need to know? Oh, there we go. If I do that, you can actually see what's there. Okay. So it looks like most of us don't have an onboarding wiki. And people may have a document or something, a shared document, which functions the same. 41% say yes, they do, but there are parts missing or out of date. 10% say yes and is completely up to date, which is awesome. That's never been my experience anywhere I've been at, so that's great. Eli saying a Docker image with your local environment goes on a long ways. Yes, and we're going to talk about that because that can be an awesome way to get started. Yes, I probably should have expanded it to be more than just wiki. I mean, some type of document that you can go to that everybody can update and keep up to date. Okay, so 2% of are saying yes, but it's out of date and will steer you wrong more than that helps. And if that's only 2%, that's great. My experience has been that's actually a higher percentage than it probably should be. Let's see here. Okay, so think about wiki page. So wiki page or some type of document that people can update as they find things that are going to be useful for the next people to come. That can be very, very helpful, but it can be a really, really bad replacement for a human. And oftentimes we have this idea of, oh, I put it in the wiki so we don't have to talk to someone. That's not the goal of a wiki. The goal of a wiki is to make sure that everybody's looking at the same information. It's not to keep you from having to sit down and talk with the person that's onboarding. And it will probably, in most situations, it's probably going to need to be updated. So an ideal situation is that you're somehow paired up with a partner or an existing team member that takes you through the setup for your computer while updating the wiki to make sure that the current version is better than what you're while updating the wiki to make sure that anything that's out of date gets corrected. So the benefit of this is if you take a new if I'm coming into a company and I'm new, I've got my new computer, I've got set up, there's a wiki page that gives me lots of instructions. I can go through and probably figure some things out. But if something's out of date, it's going to be really hard for me to know if it's out of date or if I've somehow messed something up. And so I may try it 10 times before I say, hey, this is out of date. Also, as a new person, I'm probably not going to be comfortable making an update to change it. But if you pair me up with someone else that can go through this with me, one, I'll get to know people better. It'll help establish more of the team culture. It'll establish a collaborative way of working. I'll have somebody I know that I can go ask for help later. But they're going to be able to tell me, hey, yeah, that doesn't seem right. What you're doing there, it's giving you an error. I think we need to do this. And then if their suggestion works, update the wiki. Not only does that make it easier for the next person that's coming, but it puts me on the right footing to be comfortable contributing to the documentation and keeping it up to date. And it might be seen, some people might look and say, well, the reason we have a wiki is so, that person doesn't have to talk to the new person that's coming. But the value of actually having those conversations with the new person that's onboarding is much, much greater than whatever the cost and time is of having that person work through it with them. In fact, what you'll probably find is the best person to do that will be one of the newer members of your team. Somebody else that's been onboarded fairly recently, because they're probably going to have the best memory of last time they went through it. Now, the wiki page becomes very, very useful because the person may need to set up their computer again later, right? Later on, or may need to go in and look at something and say, how did we do this? I need to make a change to it. So if they've gone through and actually updated it as they went, that documentation is going to be very, very useful to them and to the rest of the team. But if you just kind of throw it at them and say, go figure it out here, it's not a good setup and not a good setup for success. Automated setup. So I've seen things where there's like complicated scripts that run that set all your computer up, and these can be very, very, very useful. But once again, they're not a replacement for a human. It's also very easy. One thing that can happen a lot of times, they can end up getting out of date. So you can get it out of date, and then you're running something and it doesn't quite work, and so then you've got to dig in and try to figure out why it's not working. Which is why if you're doing automated setup, your best bet is to pair them up with somebody that's got enough familiarity with the automated setup to where if something goes wrong, they can help walk them through it and help them understand not just, oh, I run this script to run the automated setup, but what it's doing behind the scenes. It's also very easy when it comes to automated setup. It's very easy to get to a situation to where we assume too many things about the future and end up painting ourselves into a corner accidentally. So on most of the automated setup that I've seen really, really work well is when you're using it as little as possible to do the most value in ways that are easy to change if you need to do something different. So a very interesting situation I've seen people do is there's a, I can't remember who actually published this, but they said what they do for a lot of repetitive stuff is they'll start out with a script that just says, do this, press enter to continue. Do this, press enter to continue. And they make that script just be something that triggers them to do all the things they need to do, just as a checklist to go through. Once they've got that working and the checklist works, then they'll start taking those steps and automating them. And so they're able to automate the things that take the most time while not automating things that might take a lot of time to do but don't produce a lot of value. I think that's a very interesting way of creating scripts to do setup and do different processes. Checking over the comments right here. Cool. Containers. So I've seen some teams try to set up to where you've actually got a container that you can download or run on your computer, and you're working inside that container to do your work. Or you're using the container because it's got everything you set up needs to run your code. Another way I've seen is where your tests actually download a container that's set up with everything it needs, so your computer doesn't have to go through and change the 100 settings it needs to run, to stand up the database and the web server and stuff. These can be very, very useful ways of getting people up to run quickly. But the value can fall off quickly if it starts doing too much. So I've was on one team that was really using containers a lot, and it was very impressive what they were trying to do with it. The idea was you could run it in the cloud, it would run in a container, so you could bring it down locally and run it and be able to troubleshoot anything that you needed. In practice, though, there was only one or two people that actually had enough experience with the containers to deal with them locally and troubleshoot stuff. So for most people, using the containers actually made it harder to troubleshoot stuff, and they ended up just doing most of the troubleshooting in the cloud anyway. That's a case to where what's a really good idea for people with one box of experience actually makes things harder for someone else. So this can be a great way to onboard people, can be very, very powerful, but you've got to make sure that you really think through how is it providing value, and if we try to do too much with it, we may get to a point where the value actually drops off. Okay, computer setup. I mentioned this a few times, but don't leave people on their own just to go ahead and figure things out. That's not very nice. That's not how you would probably want to be treated. If you imagine coming to a team and you've got one team that says, okay, here's the wiki page, here's our automated scripts. You're going to partner with Joe, and Joe's going to get with you. You guys will do a screen share or sit next to each other, and he'll go through and make sure everything gets set up and explain to you what it's doing, what the automation's doing, take you through the wiki page, make sure everything's up to date, show you how to update it when you find things that are out of date, and just take you through that whole process. Versus, here's a wiki page, go figure it out. It's much, much better to actually work with someone, and it's more efficient, and you create an environment that's much more conducive to actually doing agile development. The value of setting things up with a new team member is worth way more than the cost of that person that's got to walk through it with them. Okay, so let's talk about getting started. So we've got somebody, they're set up, we've got them onboarded to the point they've got a laptop, they understand some things about team culture, and now they're going to start doing work. You've probably heard of some companies that the first day they are expected to push something all the way through to production. That's the expectation because they want people to hit the ground running, and also not have a fear of, oh, I'm not going to be able to push anything to production without permission until I've been here for 2 years. So setting expectations. Make sure that team members know that they have time to get up to speed, right? You want an expectation that they're not going to feel they have to know everything. If you partner them with people, so they've got people that they know to reach out to and they're used to working with people on the team, you kind of set the expectation from the very beginning that they're going to need help, and that's just fine. So make sure that they're actually comfortable asking questions. It sounds like something that should be a no-brainer. New person on team, you should be able to ask questions, but a lot of team cultures do not actually support that. And so you want to make sure that you're heading that off to make sure that they are comfortable asking questions. They've got people that they can work with to ask questions. When a new person joins your team, you really want to try to set them up for success by letting them work on something that they can deliver all the way through as soon as possible. Now, this doesn't mean that they're working on it just completely by themselves, but if you can give them something they can work on and deliver, you're going to, even if it means somebody else is pairing with them for that whole time, the dividends that is going to pay over time of them feeling like this, of them knowing the right people, knowing the process all the way through, having the confidence to ask people when they know help, but also having the confidence that they can take on something, are going to be huge. So question for you: when a new developer joins your team, how long is it before they get credit for delivering something in front of the customer? So this would be like probably at a demo. You got a demo and you're saying, yeah, Joe joined the team X months ago, X time ago, and they're going to show you how this works. So good job, Joe. Okay, and so it looks like we got half people are saying within the first iteration, which is great. There's a lot of places where that's not the case. Now it looks like 25% of us are saying a lot of times they don't get credit for anything they deliver. So you've got people that are delivering things, but they don't get credit. That not only for onboarding, but that might be something worth considering, seeing if there's a way to improve that, because that's not always a really fun environment to work in when you're not getting credit for what you're contributing. Within a year, and then we've got some where no one's ever contributed anything, which is unfortunate, but sometimes that's the case in some places. So giving credit, let them be seen for their contribution and let them demo their work. Make sure the stakeholders recognize their contribution. But even if it's something really, really small, just having a chance to be able to be in front of the customer and say, hey, look, here's this thing you asked for, I'm delivering it, sets up the environment that you want for a new person really focused on being able to deliver all the way through. And celebrate the success. So it's a rite of passage getting that first story done. I've had things where we created a celebration wall for something that the team needed to do. And the first time you did that thing, kind of like the chef hats, you got your name up on the wall. It could be the same thing with onboarding. You've got some way of saying, here's the date that every person that joined their team made their first push all the way through to production or did their first demo. But you want to make sure you highlight their skill and what they're bringing to the team. Okay, and getting started, pairing. Consider, like I mentioned before, consider assigning a partner to walk through the process. Don't make people have to go find someone for help, especially early on. Make sure they're there partnering with someone. And one of the things you want is them to be very willing to give up quickly and ask for help. If two of us are working together and I'm new and you're a senior person been working on this and I get stumped, I'm probably going to spend a lot of time trying to do it to prove that I can do it. If the two of us together are more likely to give up, because if I can't figure it out and you can't figure it out, we're going to ask for help a lot sooner. And that's one of the big benefits of pairing. And also make sure you set up places that the new member can help other people. There are probably things that they're bringing to the team that other people on the team don't have. So make sure it's happening both ways. Pairing versus mentoring, right? You're there to pair and work together, which means you're both collaborating with each other instead of one person just telling the other person what to do. Okay, the details. So here's some areas we want to talk about in the details. So how are we doing on time? I thought this would only take 45 minutes because it was a new talk, but I put more content in here than I realized. So thinking about architecture. So here's the details. You've got somebody working. How do we make sure that they've got all the details they need to be successful? They need to be able to answer the question, how do things work? Once again, diagrams can be very useful. Pointing people to a wiki page is not good onboarding. I've seen a lot of teams that do sessions where they go through the architecture and then they record it and they point new people at the sessions. That can be useful, and there might be reasons to record sessions, but you're probably better off actually doing the session for the new person and making it open to anyone else that wants to join. If it's really important, if it's important enough that it's beneficial for the new person to see it, there's probably somebody else in the organization that would be benefit from a refresher on it. So many existing team members might appreciate a refresher. I was on one team that had a very well-developed onboarding process, and they would go through a lot of talks that had been developed to explain things to new people. And it was pretty impressive at how many people that had already been to the talk would come in again, ask some more questions, get more clarity now that they had actually gotten their hands into the software. That can be a very effective way for onboarding people, but also for existing members on the team. Business domain. So don't expect good results when people don't understand the business. If somebody's working on something and they have no idea how it fits into a business, don't expect great results from that. You need to make sure that you have some way of conveying and continuing to convey what the business domain is and how it works. Wiki pages and recordings are great, but if we want to communicate efficiently and effectively, Agile says we want to have face-to-face communication. And this is also something the business domain coming back, if I sit through an hour on business domain for something that's new, and then I go work on software for 2 or 3 weeks, and I come back and look at the talk again, I'm going to ask a lot better questions and have a much better knowledge of what's being discussed that second time around. And technology. So chances are when somebody new is joining your team, they're going to have some technology that is new things they haven't seen before. You can use wiki pages and recordings to cover some things, but they're going to learn the most by actually doing. There is sometimes room for giving them a toy application to work with, something that's really, really small, like a demonstration of what something is. Like one thing I've gotten a lot of use out of is having a small version of Cucumber set up with Selenium, a really small app that people can see to understand how it works. That makes it easier to understand than working with a really, really big application that's got all the parts in there. At the same time, you can over-prioritize your toy applications in ways that start taking you away from actually delivering the real thing. So you want to have balance there in doing that. The best way, though, for them to learn the technology is pair up with someone or mob with people and just start delivering. Another details, making sure that your new person has name and face recognition with the stakeholders and that you're fostering those relationships. It would probably benefit for a lot of people when you're doing onboarding, it can be a very good investment for stakeholders to actually lead some of the onboarding sessions. So for someone fairly high up to be able to say, here's the business, here's what we're doing, that doesn't mean that they're necessarily having to spend hours and hours training on every aspect. But having somebody that's high level explaining why this is important and kind of how the business works can be a very important part of the onboarding process.